Hello and welcome to Auto Shenanigans. How the devil are you? Have you had a good week? My name is John. Thank you very much for joining me for another exciting Great British Road Journey. This week I'm in Cumberland, except I'm not because it's now known as Cumbria, which used to be divided into two smaller counties known as Westmoreland and Cumberland, with a little bit of Lancashire bolted on for good measure. By visiting these older non-existent counties, I can squeeze a few more episodes out of the series, but it's also more historically relevant to what we're doing, which today is taking a journey from Penrith to Carlisle. As always, to help navigate our way around, we'll be using my 1923 Michelin guidebook, period-correct maps, and imagine my surprise in Penrith, there's a church and an old castle. Penrith seems to exist mostly as a place for tourists to visit. There doesn't seem to have been any large-scale industry in the town. However, it has at least doubled in size since the days of my guidebook, now with over 16,000 residents. So that's something. This is also something recommended by my guidebook and found in the grounds of St Andrew's Church. It's an arrangement of stones known as the Giant's Grave. The 3 and a bit metre high columns are the remains of cross shafts that are estimated to date back to the 10th century, and it's said to be the final resting place of Owen Caesarius, the King of Cumbria, between 920 and 937 AD. The thing is, it might be a big fat phony.
You're a phony!
In the 1700s, the church was rebuilt, and at the time, the stones and columns were moved to another part of the site. The plan was to use them as part of the construction. However, this was met by much opposition from local residents, so they reconstructed the monument and, in the process of doing so, damaged parts of it. So it's very possible that we're not even looking at the original Giant's Grave at all. Coming up next, a petrol station. When you come to Penrith, you don't think about visiting a petrol filling station, but the Rheged Centre have a different opinion, where alongside the petrol station is an exciting family day out where you can explore shops, a cafe, a gallery, a cinema, stuff. And you may have noticed it's a bit of an odd building. It's designed to blend in with the environment and incorporates what used to be Red Hill's lime kiln, which closed in the mid-1800s. It's run by a company known as Westmoreland, and they also own T-Bay and Gloucester services, where they pulled off the same trick as the Rheged Centre, where they've effectively turned what is a petrol filling station and service station into a tourist attraction and destination. From one old lime kiln to another now, because just up the road is an abandoned limestone quarry known as Flusco Lodge Quarry, which is thought to have opened sometime in the 1860s. There's plenty of leftover buildings for us to take a look at, but the most interesting are perhaps the large lime kilns, which were built in the 1950s, and they're unusual because they're made out of concrete and have a concrete brick fascia. After its closure in the 1980s, the site wasn't really used for much, but during the construction of the A66 dual carriageway next door, it was used to dump all of the spoil from construction. More recently, plans were put forward to convert it into a waste disposal site, but it turns out that 40% of the quarry sits within the Lake District National Park, much to the annoyance of builders and developers, because there's no way that they would let you build such a site in a national park, even if it is just the tiniest little corner. On with the journey, and we'll be using the A66 because we've no other choice. In the old days, it didn't exist and was instead known as the B5288 and the A594, although interestingly, whilst it's now a dual carriageway, the westbound carriageway more or less follows the route of the old road, and lucky for us, that's the direction we need to go for our next stop, the town of Keswick, which is another town built around tourism. However, it's perhaps most well known for pencils. Situated here is the Derwent Pencil Museum, as recommended by my guidebook. And the reason that pencils are a big deal in Keswick is because it's here that the modern pencil as we know it came to be. In the early 1500s, a huge deposit of graphite was discovered a short distance to the south of Keswick, which today we understand as being the largest deposit of solid graphite ever discovered, and this led to the invention of the graphite pencil. Many years later, in 1832, a factory was set up in Keswick to manufacture pencils under the brand name Derwent Pencils, which is named after Derwent Water, a lake found next to Keswick. Business went well and was expanded in 1916 by the Cumberland Pencil Company, who built a much newer and larger factory that's still operating today and still making pencils. And isn't it amazing that an entire industry that started a few miles away in a graphite mine in the 1500s is still going in 2025? Something that isn't still going is the Keswick to Cockermouth Railway, which closed in the 1960s. However, where we'd have once found Bassenthwaite Lake Station, we now find Bassenthwaite Lake Station Cafe, and it's rather special because you're served your tea and tiffin or Kendal mint cake while seated in a railway carriage. It's even got its own steam engine. But here's the thing, the engine and carriages are a replica.
You're a phony!
Both the engine and carriages are not and have not ever been a functioning train. They were built as props for use in the 2017 film Murder on the Orient Express, and the real train nerds may have already noticed that the cafe carriage is a lot wider than the standard carriage specification. This is because it was built to accommodate a film crew and equipment. It's more of a film set than it is a train. As for the locomotive, it's a replica of a French SNCF Class 241, steam engine, but who cares whether it's real or not, because it's a lovely place to stop and have some lunch. Lovely indeed, but we are to move on to our next destination, and we'll be using what used to be the A594 before it was replaced by the newer A66 and downgraded to become a B road, although interestingly the newer A66 was built on what used to be the railway that served the Bassenthwaite Lake Station. Anyway, our next stop has a bit of an unfortunate name. Cockermouth, 'cause cock. But really it's because Cockermouth sits on the mouth of the River Cocker. It's a small market town that since the days of my guidebook has doubled in size, now with around 9,000 residents. My guidebook notes that it's the birthplace of William Wordsworth, a poet that no one really cares about anymore, who existed between 1770 and 1850. It also says that there's an old castle and a church to look at, but nah. Because a short distance away in a place called Dovenby is an automotive test track. I don't think anyone was expecting that, but here we are. The track is owned by a company called M-Sport, and it was built in around 2016 to FIA regulations, featuring several course configurations. M-Sport was formed in 1979 when rally driver Malcolm Wilson decided he needed a way to facilitate his racing career. Business plan? No, none of that. He just wanted to go racing, which they did. And in the 1990s, they took over the Ford World Rally team, building a Focus rally car for none other than Colin McRae, if it's good enough for Colin. And who knew that some of the best rally vehicles were built here in the arse end of nowhere in Cumberland? We are to head towards our final destination next, and to do so we'll be using the A595, which hasn't changed all that much over the years, and likewise most of the journey will be uneventful with nothing to see, because sometimes that's just how it is. However, before we reach our last stop, I thought we could take a quick detour to look at an old airfield. This is RAF Great Autumn, which operated between 1943 and 1952 as a satellite and training airfield. It's fairly unremarkable, but what interests me is that the public road follows the course of the original airfield perimeter road, so when you're driving along you can pretend you're an airfield. But putting the fun to one side for a moment, there's a bit of a sad story associated with the airfield that has put me off walking around. Back in the early 2000s, the farming industry saw an outbreak of a highly infectious disease known as foot and mouth disease, which affects animals like sheep and cattle, and one of the worst affected areas was Cumbria, aka Cumberland. The cost of the farming industry was about £20 billion in today's money. Billion. 20 of them. That's an awful lot. And whilst I do appreciate we'd have probably been eating them anyway, 6 million animals had to be culled, 500,000 of which are underneath my feet right now because, like many others, the airfield was used as a mass burial ground, and in a perhaps ironic twist, the airfield is now a nature reserve. Detour over. And now Carlisle. It's a city, and the only one in Cumberland, or Cumbria. Today there are over 77,000 people living here, but in the days of my guidebook it was still a busy place with around 50,000 residents. And it's the complete opposite of all the lovely things we've seen in the last few weeks, because Carlisle is an industrial and railway town. We'll take a look at a railway thing in a bit, but first, do you want a biscuit? This is the Carr's Biscuit Factory, established by Jonathan Carr in 1831 to become the largest bakery business in the UK, that after 50 years was employing 1,000 people to make 128 different varieties of biscuit. The company has been bought and sold a few times since then, but whilst it may have a different owner, the good people of Carlisle are still hard at work making biscuits under various brand names for us fat to consume by the packet. But this year is a very important year for a very important biscuit, because 2025 marks the 100th anniversary of the McVitie's chocolate digestive biscuit, which originated in Scotland. They'd be upset if I didn't mention that, but it doesn't matter because today it's made at the Carr's Biscuit Factory, and if you don't like a McVitie's, you're just weird, aren't you? Whilst I'm sure it's all lovely at the biscuit factory, just down the road is a slightly less glamorous factory that makes Pirelli tyres. The factory came to Carlisle in the late 1960s, and to begin with, they didn't make tyres. It was built to expand Pirelli's footwear manufacturing. I didn't know they made shoes, but in the 1930s, Mr. Pirelli had the idea of using tyre rubber to make the soles of shoes, and it turned out to be a really good idea. If you've ever owned a pair of shoes or boots with a Vibram sole, it was a Pirelli idea. Whilst I'm sure the workers do an excellent job, the factory has gained a bit of a reputation for being a health and safety disaster, with several injuries occurring over the years others resulting in lawsuits, and tragically somebody has lost their life. At this point, Pirelli have paid out millions in fines and compensation, and I'm sure lessons will be learned and it'll never happen again. Now, about that railway thing, as mentioned, Carlisle was a railway town. Well, to be fair, it still is, although to a far lesser extent. At one point, Carlisle was the junction or interchange between many different railways, and this led to several yards and depots being constructed around the city. The highlight of which is the Kingmore Marshalling Yard, which at the time of opening was the largest marshalling yard in Europe. If you're thinking, yeah, but no, it doesn't look all that massive, yeah, fair enough, a lot of the original yard no longer exists. Whilst it was indeed the largest when it opened, the timing couldn't have been any worse. It was built in the late 1950s and opened in 1963, around the same time that the infamous Beeching report was released, which identified thousands of stations and miles of railway to be closed. Shit, you've just built a massive marshalling yard and most of the railways that would have made use of it are about to be shut down. That was a waste of time then. Yeah, it was. The yard was never used to its full capacity and over the years fell into a state of abandonment, although it has somewhat been rescued in as much as small parts of it are used for modern rail operations. And there we are then, guys. That's all we've got time for this week. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you liked the video. If you did, there is of course a button specifically for that, and if you haven't subscribed already, please consider doing so. That'd be wicked sweet, awesome. Enjoy the rest of your week, whatever it is you get up to. My name's John. You've been watching Auto Shenanigans, and I'll see you guys next time for another exciting Great British Road Journey. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.